They say the moon goddess never makes mistakes. Sloane had believed that once, had held it like a torch in both hands through every cold, invisible year of her life. Every morning she woke up in the healer's ward while the rest of the pack celebrated bonds and claiming ceremonies and the sacred warmth of being chosen. She had waited. She had been patient. She had told herself that when her moment came, it would mean something. It came on a Tuesday. In the dead of a northern winter, with frost crawling up the stone walls of the great hall and the breath of 500 wolves hanging in the air like smoke, the moon goddess delivered on her promise. She gave Sloane 2 mates, twin alpha kings, the most powerful men in the frozen territories. And Sloane had stood there in her plain gray dress, on hands clasped in front of her so no one would see them shake, and she had felt the bond, warm and golden and humiliatingly certain, pulling her toward them both like a tide she had no power to resist. Grant felt it first. She watched it move across his face, watched him register it, process it, and then, slowly, deliberately, shut it down. Like a door closing, like something decided before she even had a name. He looked at her the way you look at a mistake. The hall was silent. I do not accept this bond. 5 words, flat, final, spoken to the room, not to her, because she wasn't worth the direction of his gaze. Then Hayes, his twin, same iron crown, same glacial eyes, same impenetrable wall of power that made ordinary wolves step back without knowing why. He looked at her longer than Grant had, long enough that something cruel flickered in her chest. Hope. The most dangerous thing a girl like her could feel in a room like this. He extinguished it without blinking. Nor do I. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Sloane had ever heard. 500 wolves, people who had eaten at tables she served, elders whose fevers she had broken with her own hands in the black months when the cold came in hard and the healers worked until they couldn't stand. Warriors whose children called her by name. Not one of them moved. Not one of them breathed. They just watched, with that particular stillness that meant they were grateful. Grateful it was her standing there and not someone they loved. Grateful the discomfort would be over soon. Grateful they could go home and let the snow cover it. Sloane did not cry. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. The bond was still pulling, still burning, even as the men it connected her to turned away like she was already gone. That was the cruelest part. The moon goddess didn't take it back. She just left it there, glowing uselessly in Sloane's chest like an ember with nowhere to land. She lifted her chin. If they were waiting for her to break, they would freeze to death first. The silence stretched, 5 seconds, 10, the kind that hardens into permanence, into a story the pack would tell for years. Remember the girl the twin kings rejected? Remember how she just stood there? And then, from the far left edge of the council platform, where the ranked advisors stood in descending order of power, where the last position belonged to a man no one summoned, no one consulted, no one had ever once looked to for anything. A voice, quiet, unhurried, carrying the specific weight of someone who had already decided long before the words left his mouth that he meant every syllable. Roman didn't raise his hand, didn't step forward, didn't perform it for the crowd. He just spoke, and 4 words rewrote everything. Then she's mine. Chapter 1. The laughter started before she reached him. Not loud, not cruel in the obvious way. No one in the Frost Hall was foolish enough to mock openly while 2 kings still stood on the platform. It was the other kind, the quiet kind, the murmur that moves through a crowd like water finding cracks, the kind built from sideways glances and shoulders turning inward and mouths dropping close to ears. The kind that said everything without saying anything at all. The healer's assistant, claimed by the Beta's aid, the girl the twin kings threw back. Sloane walked toward Roman across the white stone circle, and she heard every word of it without hearing a single one. Her feet were steady. She had decided that much before she took the first step, that whatever her chest was doing, whatever the bond was doing. Whatever the slow structural collapse happening somewhere behind her sternum felt like, her feet would be steady. That was the only thing she could control in this hall right now, and she would control it absolutely. Roman had not moved. He stood at the edge of the council platform exactly as he had when he spoke. No performance, no adjustment for the crowd, no acknowledgement of the wave of reaction his 4 words had sent through 500 wolves. His hands were at his sides. His eyes were on her. He was perhaps 30, perhaps slightly older, with a face that was neither remarkable nor forgettable, the kind of face that became more interesting the longer you looked at it, which most people in this hall had never bothered to do. She stopped 2 feet from him. Up close, she could see the faint scar that ran along his jaw. The worn quality of his ceremonial coat, present and correct, every requirement of the formal dress code met, but not new. Nothing about him was new. Nothing about him announced itself. She understood with sudden clarity exactly why the hall was laughing. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Her voice came out level. She was grateful for that. "I know," Roman said. "They'll make your life difficult." "They already do." She studied him for a moment. He studied her back with the same unhurried attention he had given her from the platform, as though time were not a resource he was concerned about spending. "Why?" she asked. It was the only question that mattered. Not who are you or what happens now or any of the practical architecture of what he had just done. Just why? Just the single word at the center of all of it. Bay Roman was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "Because the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes." It was what she had believed herself, once, an hour ago, before it turned out that belief made you stand in a white circle in front of everyone you had ever known and get taken apart in public. She did not say that. "You're aware this changes nothing about my status," she said instead. "Claiming me doesn't—" "I'm aware of what it does and doesn't do." "I'm an Omega rank, a healer's assistant. You're—" She paused, because she realized she didn't know exactly what he was. She knew his name the way you knew the names of furniture in a room. Present, peripheral, never examined. Roman. Council platform, left side, last position. That was the full extent of her knowledge of him. Something moved in his expression. Almost amusement. Almost. "A poor trade," he said. "I know what they're thinking. And I've never particularly cared what they think." Elder Voss reached them before anyone else did. He was the oldest member of the Pack Council, a man so thoroughly constructed from ceremony and hierarchy that Sloane sometimes thought, if you removed the titles from him, there would be nothing left. Just an outline in the shape of a wolf who had spent 60 years deciding what other wolves were worth. He moved through the crowd with the particular authority of someone accustomed to crowds parting, and the crowd parted now, and he stopped before Roman with an expression that was working very hard to remain neutral and failing in the corners. "This is highly irregular," Voss said. "The claiming ground is open to any unmated wolf," Roman said. That's Pack Law, Article 9. "You are a council aide. Your rank is sufficient under Article 9. Roman's voice did not change in volume or temperature. He spoke the way he did everything, apparently, with a quietness that nonetheless left no room for argument. "Unless the law has been amended since this morning, Elder Voss, in which case I'd welcome the citation." Voss's jaw tightened. He looked at Sloane with an expression she recognized, the particular assessment of someone calculating the lowest possible value to assign to a problem. Then he looked back at Roman. "The Alpha Kings may contest this." "They may." Roman said it as though the possibility were mildly interesting. "They had their opportunity at the claiming ground. They declined. A pack law is clear on contested claims made after formal refusal." "You've studied this." "I study most things." Another silence. Voss was not accustomed to being outsighted in his own hall, and the adjustment showed in the rigid set of his shoulders. He looked at Sloane one more time, at her plain gray dress, at her healer's ward hands, at everything about her that confirmed his instinct that this was a problem best resolved quickly and quietly. The documentation will need to be filed by morning, he said finally. Stiffly, a retreat dressed as procedure. I'll have it on your desk within the hour, Roman said. Voss left. The crowd that had gathered close enough to hear parted again. And Sloane became aware, in the ringing quiet of that small aftermath, that she was now, in whatever technical and binding sense the law recognized, Roman's. She was not sure how she felt about that. She was not sure she had the capacity to feel anything clearly right now. She found out what she'd lost when she went back for her things. The healer's ward was in the east corridor of the PAC's main settlement, a long, low building of gray stone that stayed 10 degrees warmer than the rest of the complex because of the herb fires they kept burning for drying and distillation. Sloane had slept in the back room for 6 years, ever since head healer Marsh had taken her on as an apprentice at 17 and given her the small courtesy of a private space in exchange for the large courtesy of being available at all hours. Marsh was waiting for her at the door. He was a precise man in his 50s with careful eyes and ink-stained fingers and the particular exhausted competence of someone who had been good at his job for so long it had stopped feeling like an achievement. He had been kind to her, in the functional way of people who are kind because it costs them nothing and cruelty would be inefficient. He did not look kind now. He looked uncomfortable, which in Sloane's experience was frequently worse. "I've heard," he said. "Then you know I'll need to collect my things." Sloane, he paused, adjusted the collar of his coat with one finger, a nervous habit she had catalogued over 6 years without ever remarking on. "The ward's position has always been tied to your status here. An unmated Omega working under PAC Council oversight. That's one arrangement. A claimed female under a Council aide's bond. That's a different matter. The ward falls under Alpha jurisdiction and the Alphas will want—" "They'll want me out," Sloane said. Marsh did not deny it. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. Not desperately, just factually. The logistics of a situation she hadn't had time to map yet. "I believe the arrangement with the council aide includes quarters." He couldn't quite bring himself to say Roman's name or her new status out loud. She noticed that. Filed it. "Right," she said. She went inside and she packed. 6 years in one room and it took 11 minutes. That was the most honest accounting of what her life had accumulated. 11 minutes worth of objects. Her medical texts worn to softness at the spines. Her spare clothes folded small. The dried herb bundles she'd been working on, wrapped in cloth. A single photograph she kept face down that she put in the bottom of the bag without looking at. She stripped the cot, stacked the linens, left the room cleaner than she'd found it. She did not let herself feel anything about it until she was in the corridor with the bag over her shoulder, and then she allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of feeling it. The cold, specific grief of losing the only home she'd managed to build for herself out of other people's emergencies and long, quiet nights. And then she closed that door too, and walked. The council aide quarters were in the north wing. She had never been to the north wing. It was a different altitude of the settlement, not the Alpha King's level, not the ceremonial halls, but a step above the service corridors she had spent 6 years moving through. The stone here was the same gray, but the ceilings were higher, and the braziers burned cleaner, and the drafts were slightly less aggressive. Roman was already there when she arrived. He had changed out of his ceremonial coat into something plainer and was standing at a table covered in documents, writing. He looked up when she came in but did not make a production of it. The quarters were 2 rooms, a main room with a table, 2 chairs, a fire, and a window that looked out over the ice fields to the north, an endless white-gray expanse under a sky the color of cold pewter, and a second room, smaller, with a separate door. Roman gestured to it. "That one's yours. Lock works from the inside." She looked at him. "I'm not going to pretend today wasn't what it was," he said. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. The lock works." She crossed to the second room and looked inside. A cot, a chest, a window the same width as a man's shoulders looking out over the same ice fields from a slightly different angle. It was smaller than what she'd had in the healer's ward. It was hers. She set her bag down on the chest and came back to the main room. Roman had returned to his documents. "What do you actually do?" she asked. "On the council. Research, documentation, legal record." He didn't look up. "The work no one else wants to do, but everyone needs done." "How long have you been on it?" 8 years. She absorbed that. 8 years on the council, invisible enough that she hadn't known his last name until today. "They'll come for me," she said. "Grant and Hayes. When the bond doesn't... when it keeps..." She stopped. She didn't want to say it out loud, that the bond she could still feel burning in her chest was not Roman's, that it belonged to 2 men who had just publicly refused it, that it would keep burning regardless of what the law said about her status now, because the moon goddess apparently delivered on promises and then stood back and watched the wreckage. Roman set down his pen. He looked at her with those steady, unhurried eyes. That look she was beginning to understand was not blankness, but something more deliberate than that. Attention, fully applied and carefully contained. "I know," he said simply. And we'll deal with it when it happens." She stood in the doorway of his quarters in the north wing, with the ice fields stretching gray and endless behind her, through the window, and the smell of the herb fires from the healer's ward already fading from her clothes, and the bond still burning uselessly in her chest, like something that had not yet learned it was unwanted. "Why do I get the feeling," she said slowly, "that you already know exactly how this is going to go?" Roman picked his pen back up. The faintest suggestion of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, not quite satisfaction, but something in the family of both. "Get some sleep, Sloane," he said. "Tomorrow starts early." She went to her room. She did not sleep for a long time. Outside, the ice fields held the dark in total silence. And somewhere in the north wing of the settlement, in a room stacked with 8 years of documents no one had thought to read, a quiet man worked until the brazier burned low and the cold pressed in, and the frozen territories settled into another long black night. Chapter 2. Morning in the frozen territories arrived not with light, but with a change in the quality of the dark. Sloane had grown up here. She knew the difference between 3 in the morning black and 6 in the morning black, the way she knew the difference between a fever that would break and one that wouldn't, not by measurement, but by some internal calibration built from years of paying attention. She was awake before the gray crept into the window, lying on the cot in Roman's spare room with her eyes open and the bond burning steadily in her chest, and her mind doing the thing it always did under pressure, which was to run the inventory. What she had: a room with a lock. 8 years of medical knowledge, 2 hands that knew how to be useful, a name that as of yesterday carried a new and complicated set of associations. What she didn't have: her work, her ward, 6 years of accumulated small authority, any clear understanding of what came next. She got up, dressed in the dark, came out into the main room. Roman was already at the table. He looked like he had not slept, or like he was someone for whom the distinction between sleep and waking was an administrative detail rather than a biological requirement. The documents from last night had been reorganized into different stacks. There was a clay pot of something hot in the center of the table and 2 cups, which she suspected was the closest he came to announcing that he had heard her moving. She sat down across from him and poured herself a cup without asking. It was bitter and dark and warming in the way of things that make no concession to comfort. "The filing went through," he said without looking up. "Voss confirmed at dawn." That was fast. He wanted it documented before Grant and Hayes woke up. Easier to enforce a completed record than a contested one. A pause. He doesn't like it, but he likes procedural chaos less. "You knew he'd file it immediately." "I know how Voss thinks." She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at him across the table. In the gray morning light, he looked exactly as he had last night and exactly as he had on the council platform, contained, unhurried, present in a way that was different from most people's presence. Most people occupied space with some portion of their attention always elsewhere. Roman seemed to occupy space entirely. "You've been watching the council a long time," she said. 8 years. You know how all of them think." He looked up at her then. Really looked, that full. I'd direct attention landing on her face with a weight she was beginning to anticipate. "Most of them," he said. "What about Grant and Hayes?" A beat. Well enough. She wanted to ask more. She filed it instead, the way she filed everything, carefully, for later. They came at mid-morning. She heard them before she saw them, not because they were loud, but because of the specific quality of silence that preceded powerful men in motion. The conversations in the North Wing corridor outside didn't stop exactly. They just became more careful, more curated, the way voices always adjusted in the proximity of the kings. Roman stood up from the table before the knock came. He moved to the door and opened it himself, not waiting, not hesitating, and faced them in the doorway with the same expression he wore for everything. Grant and Hayes stood in the corridor with 2 guards flanking them, and Elder Voss hovering 2 steps behind, wearing the expression of a man hoping to survive the morning professionally intact. The kings looked, up close, and in the plain gray light of the North Wing rather than the ceremony fire of the Frost Hall, exactly as they had at the claiming ground. Immovable, identical, carved from something colder than ordinary men. They were both looking past Roman. At her. Sloane did not stand up. She was aware that this was noted. She was aware that the expected response to 2 alpha kings appearing in a doorway was to rise, to defer, to arrange herself in the physical grammar of someone who understood the hierarchy. She understood it perfectly. She had spent her entire life inside it. She stayed in her chair and wrapped her hands around her cup and looked back at them with the same level attention she gave patients who were frightened and covering it with aggression. Something shifted in Grant's expression. Barely. A fractional recalibration. "We need to speak with her," he said to Roman. "Not may we or we'd like to, just the declarative, stated as physics." "You're speaking near her right now," Roman said. "If you have something to say to Sloane, you can say it to Sloane." A silence with teeth in it. Hayes spoke for the first time. His voice was different from his brother's, the same authority, but where Grant's was flat and absolute, Hayes's carried something underneath it. An edge. She couldn't name it precisely yet. "The bond," he said, looking at her. Only at her. "You still feel it." It wasn't a question. Of course it wasn't. They could feel it too. She understood that now. That was the cruelty the scrolls also hadn't mentioned. Rejection didn't sever it. It just left both sides carrying something neither of them had consented to keep. "Yes," she said. "Then you understand why this arrangement—" Grant gestured at the room, at Roman, at the whole architecture of yesterday's aftermath, "is a complication." "I understand that you created the complication," Sloane said. "Yesterday, in front of 500 wolves, I was standing in the circle, if you recall." The temperature in the doorway dropped 2 degrees. Roman had not moved. He stood at an angle that was not quite between her and the kings, but was not quite not between them either. A position of studied neutrality that she was beginning to understand was its own form of deliberate geometry. "The bond will intensify," Hayes said, still looking at her, that unnameable edge sharpening. "You know this. We know this. Ignoring it doesn't—" "Hayes," Grant's voice. One word. Hayes stopped. Something passed between the twins in the way of people who have spent 30 years communicating in a register below speech. Hayes's jaw set. He looked away from her for the first time. "We'll be in contact," Grant said to Roman. "The way you say something when you mean this is not finished and want the other party to be fully aware of that fact." "I'll be here," Roman said. They left. Voss scurried after them without making eye contact with anyone. The corridor sound gradually returned to normal around their departure, like water closing over a stone. Sloane realized she had been holding her breath for approximately the last 90 seconds. She let it out slowly, set her cup down. "That goes well," she said. "Better than I expected, actually," Roman said, and came back to the table. She needed work. This was not abstract. This was physical, practical, structural. She was a person who had organized her entire existence around being useful, and the removal of that function left something jagged and restless in her that she didn't know how to manage with stillness. She told Roman this on the second morning, without preamble, while he was already at his documents. He listened, didn't interrupt. The ward is closed to me, she said. Marsh made that clear. I need something to do or I will lose my mind inside this room by the end of the week. Roman was quiet for a moment. Then, there's a clinic in the outer settlement, East Edge, past the storage buildings. Pack law requires a healer on rotation, but the formal healers don't like going out that far. It's mostly outer ring wolves, low rank, labor positions, the families who maintain the ice roads. Who covers it now? No one, currently. The last rotation healer requested reassignment 3 months ago. She looked at him. And you know this because I document resource gaps for the council. A pause. I filed the reassignment request myself. No one has acted on it. She understood then. It had not been a coincidence, the information he had just offered her. You're telling me there's a clinic with no healer that you already filed paperwork to fill, she said slowly, and you're mentioning it the morning after I tell you I need work. Roman's pen did not stop moving. The filing is public record, he said mildly. Anyone could access it. Roman! He looked up, and there it was again, that almost expression, the one that lived at the exact border between neutral and something warmer, visible only if you were paying the specific kind of attention she was apparently now paying. The appointment would need council approval, he said. Voss would object on principle. I have 3 votes that aren't Voss. You've already counted. I count most things. She sat back in her chair and looked at him, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to yet. The way she had been too raw and too careful and too occupied with surviving to do until right now. The worn coat and the scarred jaw and the 8 years of documents and the 4 words spoken in a frozen hall and the 2 cups on the table every morning and the filing he had done 3 months ago for a clinic no one else thought mattered. Why do I get the feeling, she said, echoing herself from 2 nights ago, that you've been paying attention to things for a very long time? Roman held her gaze for a moment. Something settled in his expression. Not the almost amusement of before, but something quieter and more serious underneath it. Some things are worth paying attention to, he said. He went back to his documents. Sloane looked out the window at the ice fields and the low gray sky and the outer settlement visible at the far edge of the white, small, dark shapes of buildings against the cold, a clinic with no healer, a pack full of low-rank wolves that nobody with any standing had thought to care about. The bond burned in her chest. For the first time since the Frost Hall, she noticed that it wasn't only the bond from Grant and Hayes that she felt. There was something else, quieter, steadier, so much less demanding that she had mistaken it for the absence of feeling rather than the presence of something that didn't need to announce itself. She looked at Roman's bent head, his pen moving across the page. She looked away before he looked up. Chapter 3. The outer clinic smelled like cold stone and old smoke and the particular mineral sharpness of ice melt water, which meant it smelled, to Sloane, like competence waiting to be applied. Council approval had taken 4 days. Roman had been right about the votes and right about Voss, who had objected on 3 separate procedural grounds and been outsighted on all 3. The appointment was temporary, technically, pending quarterly review, but it came with access to the Eastern supply stores and the right to requisition medical materials through the formal healer channels, which was enough. She arrived on a Monday in the gray pre-light with a bag of instruments and found 7 people already waiting outside the locked door. By noon, there were 19. They came with things that had been quietly not dealt with for 3 months, a bone that had healed slightly wrong, a chest infection that had been managed with willpower and insufficient herbs, a child with an ear condition that a formal healer had told the mother was not serious enough to warrant a dedicated appointment. Sloane worked through all of it without stopping, without complaint, without the careful triage of importance that the main ward had always applied to outer ring wolves. She did not think about Grant and Hayes. She thought about them constantly. The bond saw to that. It had no interest in her schedule and made no accommodation for the fact that she would prefer not to feel a persistent warm pull toward two men who had publicly discarded her. It burned through her work hours and her meal hours and her sleep hours with the impartial persistence of something operating on a law she hadn't written. But in the clinic, she had the other thing to hold on to. The steadier thing. She found out what Roman was on a Thursday. It happened by accident, the way the most important things tended to. She had come back to the North Wing later than usual, a difficult berth in the outer settlement. Everything fine in the end, but the hours had stretched. And she was tired in the specific way of someone who has been precisely focused for too long and needs the particular relief of putting the focus down. She heard it before she reached the door. Voices. Not Roman's. His she knew now by its specific register, the particular frequency of a man who chose his words the way a surgeon chose instruments. These were other voices, sharper, younger, and underneath them, Roman's. She stopped in the corridor. Can't keep ignoring the ice road reports. 3 incidents in the last month alone. Logistics filed it under weather variance. Roman's voice, flat. Weather variance, a different voice, incredulous. 2 wolves fell through on the northern crossing. One of them is still in the... A pause. Sloane's clinic, actually. I know, I read her intake files. Then you know it's structural. The eastern load-bearing points haven't been reinforced since the expansion 7 years ago, when the pack added 300 members to the outer settlement and didn't update the infrastructure budget. Roman again. I filed a structural review request 14 months ago. It was deprioritized. A silence. Refile it, said the first voice. Oh, under emergency protocol this time. If it comes from you, it'll be reviewed by the same council that deprioritized it the first time. Roman. A different quality in the voice now, something between frustration and something else. Respect, she realized, reluctant and genuine. You've been building the file for 2 years. 3 incidents in 30 days is enough to trigger mandatory review. If you go to the full council with full documentation, I'll do it when the file is complete. Quietly. Finally. A pause. When is it complete? When I say it is. She heard movement and stepped back from the door and made herself busy with the strap of her bag until the 2 wolves came out of the room and moved past her down the corridor. She recognized them both vaguely. Mid-rank council members, older than Roman, only with the slightly harried quality of people who carried real administrative weight. They nodded at her with the particular careful courtesy of people who were still recalibrating what she was now. She went inside. Roman was at the table, always at the table, but the documents spread in front of him were different from the ones she had seen before, larger sheets covered in dense notation that she recognized after a moment as structural diagrams, infrastructure maps, the ice roads marked in dark ink with small, careful annotations at each load-bearing point. He looked up. "You heard that?" he said. "The door's not that thick." He looked at her for a moment, assessing something. Then he sat back. 14 months, she said. "You filed it 14 months ago." 15. And now? And no one acted on it. The outer settlement infrastructure isn't a priority. The outer settlement wolves aren't a priority. He said it without bitterness, just the level acknowledgement of a fact he had long since processed. The people who make the decisions don't use the ice roads. But you do. He looked at her. I grew up out there. She absorbed this, looked at the maps, looked at him. You grew up in the outer settlement, she said slowly. Low rank. You came up through, what, council administration? Clerical staff at 17, aide position at 22, council appointment at 24. A pause. Voss opposed each one. Of course he did. He was right to, by the hierarchy's logic. No bloodline worth noting. No wolf rank that commanded respect. Just work. His mouth moved slightly. A lot of work. She thought about the documents, 8 years of them, the legal citations produced on the spot in the Frost Hall, the clinic filing 3 months before she needed it, the ice road maps and the 15-month-old review request and the 2 council votes lined up and ready. She thought about a man who had learned from the beginning that he would never be given anything, and had decided that the solution to that was to know more, document more, prepare more, understand more than anyone who had the luxury of simply being born into consequence. "Your rank," she said. "On the council, last position, left side." "Lowest ranked aide with voting rights," he said. "Yes, that's what everyone sees." "That's what I let them see." She looked at him for a long moment. "The ice road file," she said. "Ooh, how complete is it?" "Close. What does it need?" "Medical documentation of impact. The incidents have council notation but no formal health record attached." He held her gaze. "The wolves from the Eastern Crossing incidents, they're in your intake files." Of course they were. Of course that was why he had read them. "You need my clinical records attached to the file," she said, "to trigger the mandatory review." "I need them if you're willing to provide them. It's your documentation, your call." She sat down across from him. The fire was low, the ice fields dark outside the window, the settlement settling into its long northern night around them. The maps were spread across the table between them like a plan that had been in progress for longer than she had known he existed. "Give me access to the file," she said. "I'll have the medical documentation ready by the end of the week." Roman looked at her across the maps and the low fire, that almost expression again, but different this time. Deeper. Something that wasn't almost anything, actually. Something direct and unguarded that he reined back in after 2 seconds, that she had been watching carefully enough to catch. "You should know," he said carefully, "that when I file it, when it goes to the full council under emergency protocol with complete documentation, Grant and Hayes will see it. They chair the infrastructure committee." "I know. It will require a full council session. You'd need to attend, in the same room." "I know that too." He looked at her for another moment. "Most people in your position would be keeping a low profile." "Most people in my position," Sloane said. "Oh, would not have a position. You made sure I had one. The least I can do is use it." The fire crackled. Outside, somewhere in the dark, the wind moved across the ice fields with the low, sustained sound of something very large breathing. Roman picked up his pen. "End of the week, then," he said. She pulled the nearest map toward her and started reading. Grant came alone. This was the thing she hadn't predicted. Not the visit itself, which she had been expecting in various forms since the morning in the doorway, but the aloneness of it. Grant and Hayes moved as a unit. Had moved as a unit, she suspected, since before either of them could walk. The twin dynamic was structural, not just habitual. The pack expected it, the hierarchy reinforced it. My 2 kings were more stable than one in the complex political geography of the frozen territories. Grant alone, in the corridor outside the outer clinic on a Wednesday afternoon, was something different. She was locking up when she saw him. He was not in ceremonial dress. No crown, no formal coat, just the dark, practical clothing of a man who had come somewhere without wanting it noted. He stood far enough from the clinic door to have plausible distance from the intention of having come there, but close enough that she knew. She finished locking the door, turned around, looked at him. He looked back. The bond pulled. She had stopped being surprised by it. She stood inside it the way you stand inside weather. It was happening regardless. She could either spend energy resisting it, or she could just breathe and remain functional. "You restarted the clinic," he said. "I did. No one authorized. Council authorized it, formally. Would you like the filing reference?" Something moved in his face. Not quite what had moved there in the Frost Hall, not contempt, not dismissal, something less comfortable than either of those things. "You've been seeing outer ring wolves," he said. "The intake numbers came across the infrastructure report. I see anyone who comes to the door. That's not how the formal ward operates." "I'm not the formal ward." She adjusted her bag strap. "Is there something you needed, or did you come to discuss clinic intake policy?" A silence. The wind off the ice fields was sharp today, carrying the fine, dry snow that didn't fall so much as move horizontally. It found every gap in clothing with the impersonal thoroughness of something that had been doing it for 10,000 years. "The bond," Grant said. Lower. Not quite reluctant, but carrying the weight of something a man like him had not had occasion to speak about plainly. "It hasn't." "No," she said, "it hasn't." He looked at her. She looked back. The distance between them on the snow-dusted path felt simultaneously like a few feet and like something much less bridgeable than that. "I didn't know," he said finally. It came out careful. Too careful in the way of men who are saying something adjacent to what they mean because the actual thing is not yet available to them. "In the hall. There were reasons Grant." She said his name for the first time. It sat between them with an odd weight, familiar in her mouth, in a way that had nothing to do with knowing him, that was entirely the bond's doing. "I'm not asking you to explain yourself, I'm genuinely not. Whatever you decided and why you decided it, that's yours. You don't owe me an account." He looked almost unsettled by this, like he had prepared for anger and found its absence more difficult to navigate. "What are you asking?" he said. "Nothing," she said simply. "Right now, I'm asking you for nothing." She walked past him toward the north wing. The bond pulled as she moved away. That backward tug, that absurd, persistent loyalty of something that didn't understand refusal. She walked through it steadily. She did not look back. She did not know, and would not have let herself be comforted by it if she had. That Grant stood in the snow outside the locked clinic for a long time after she left. That he stood there in the horizontal drift with his jaw tight and his hands still and the bond pulling in the direction she had gone. And for the first time since the frost hall, he looked like a man who was not certain he had been as right as he needed to be. Chapter 4. The Ice Road file went to the full council on a Friday. Roman filed it at dawn. Emergency protocol, mandatory review triggered, complete documentation attached including Sloane's medical records from 7 outer settlement wolves with documented injuries attributable to structural failure on the eastern crossing. He had done it quietly, the way he did everything without announcement. By mid-morning, the entire pack knew, not because Roman had told anyone, because the council clerk who processed emergency filings had told Elder Voss, and Voss had told 2 other elders, and the specific shape of the information, a 15-month-old review request, previously buried, I now surfaced with enough documentation to demand a full session, had moved through the pack hierarchy with the speed of something people recognized as accountability arriving uninvited. Sloane was at the clinic when Marsh found her. She had not spoken to him since the day she collected her things. He appeared in the clinic doorway at 11 in the morning looking like a man navigating personal weather. "The council session has been called for tomorrow," he said. "You're listed as a contributing witness." "I know. Sloane." He stepped inside, looked around at the clinic, at the organized shelves, the clean instruments, the 3 patients currently waiting, the evidence of 3 weeks of work that had been needed here for 3 months before she arrived. Something moved across his face. "I heard the intake numbers. 47 cases in 3 weeks. 49 now." A pause. "I should have fought harder to keep you," he said. It came out stiffly, the confession of a man not practiced in them. "You should have," she agreed. No anger, just fact. He absorbed this with the expression of someone accepting a precise and deserved verdict. "The formal healers, they'll be watching the council session. If the infrastructure review passes and the outer settlement gets formal resource allocation, there will be pressure to extend the clinic, make it permanent." "Good. Voss will oppose it. Voss opposes things. That doesn't seem to stop them." Marsh looked at her for a moment longer, then quietly, "The aide, Roman. He's been filing for the outer settlement for years. No one paid attention." "They will now," Sloane said. The council session was held in the Frost Hall. The same iron braziers, The same stone floor and ice-ribbed rafters and the particular acoustics that made everything said within its walls feel official and permanent. Sloane walked in behind Roman and 3 council members and felt the hall recognize her. A ripple through the assembled wolves, a recalibration of attention. She was different here than she had been 3 weeks ago. Same gray, same face, same hands. But she had 49 intake files in the documentation Roman carried, and the people from those files were in this hall. The outer settlement wolves, who had never had occasion to attend a formal council session, who had been told the session was mandatory for affected residents, and had come in from the cold in their working clothes with their children beside them, and stood in the hall that had never once been convened for their benefit. They stood, Sloane noticed, near the back. She walked to the front and sat in the witness seat beside Roman's documentation table and faced the council dais where Grant and Hayes sat with 3 elder members on either side. Voss at the end, already wearing the expression of a man who had decided his position before the session opened. Grant's eyes found her immediately. Hayes's did too, and Hayes, who had been a controlled and bilateral unit with his brother at every interaction before this, looked away from her first, which was not what she expected, and looked at Roman, which was also not what she expected, with an expression she had no category for yet. "The emergency filing," said Elder Crane, who chaired infrastructure, "has been reviewed by all council members. The documentation is substantial." He paused. "The filing history is also substantial. This review was first requested 15 months ago." The hall was quiet. "The original request was deprioritized at quarterly allocation," Voss said immediately. "Resources at that time were sufficient to fund the ceremonial hall renovation," Roman said. A silence. "That project was separately budgeted," Voss started. "Approved in the same quarterly session that deprioritized the ice road review. The minutes are in the documentation." Roman's voice was the same temperature it always was. "Page 31, if the council would like to reference them." Elder Crane looked at his copy. "Oh, found page 31. Read it." His expression did something complicated. "The medical documentation," said Hayes. Every head turned to him. Grant turned to him. Hayes did not look at his brother. "The medical documentation from the outer clinic," Hayes continued, looking at the files in front of him. 49 cases in 3 weeks, 7 with direct injury attribution to structural failure. He looked up, not at Roman, not at Crane, at Sloane. "You examined all of them yourself?" "Yes," she said. "And the child with the inner ear condition. That's in here." He wasn't asking. He was reading from the file with an attention that looked, Sloane thought, almost like something personal. 8 years old, told by the main ward that the condition wasn't serious enough for a dedicated appointment. 12 times, she said. The mother came to the main ward 12 times over 2 years. Something tightened in Hayes's face. Grant was very still beside him. "I want a full accounting," Hayes said. "Not just the ice roads, the clinic capacity, outer settlement resource allocation across all service categories. I want it on the council agenda for the next full session." Voss turned to him. "Alpha King, the agenda is already—" "Make room," Hayes said. "Flat, final." Grant said nothing. He was looking at Sloane. She looked back at him and held it and did not look away and did not perform anything. No challenge, no appeal, just the level attention of someone who had done the work and was comfortable in the presence of it. After a moment, Grant looked at the files. "The ice road review passes," he said. "Emergency allocation approved. D outer clinic appointment extended pending permanent review." He paused. "The vote?" It was unanimous. Voss voted yes and looked like it cost him something structural. The hall shifted afterward the way halls do when something official has become something else. People moving, voices rising, the particular energy of an outcome that surprised more people than it was willing to admit. The outer settlement wolves near the back were talking among themselves with the slightly stunned quality of people unaccustomed to being the reason a vote passed. Sloane was gathering her copies of the documentation when she became aware of Hayes beside her. She stilled. He was close, closer than he had been in the doorway of the north wing, closer than the careful distances that had characterized every interaction since the frost hall. The bond pulled with the aggravating faithfulness she had come to expect, and she breathed through it. "The child," Hayes said, not loudly, not for the room. "With the ear condition. Will she be all right?" Sloane looked at him. "With consistent treatment over the next 3 months," she said carefully. "Yes, the window hasn't closed." Hayes absorbed this. He looked like he was doing something difficult that he hadn't allotted enough time for, here in the middle of a council session aftermath, surrounded by people who were watching them with the calibrated interest of wolves who understood that what was happening between these two individuals was not actually about medical records. "I didn't know," he said, "about the outer clinic, about any of... I didn't know it had gotten to this." "You could have," she said. Not cruelly, just honestly. "Well, the filing was there." "I know." Quieter. "I know it was." She gathered the last of the files, squared them. Hayes. His name in her mouth felt different from Grant's, less careful, which was strange given that Hayes was the one who had looked at her in the frost hall. "Why did you look at me? When you said it, Grant looked past me. You looked at me." He was quiet for a long moment. The hall moved and murmured around them. "Because I wanted you to know," he said, "that I knew what I was doing." She thought about this. That's a strange thing to want someone to know. "Yes," he said, "I'm aware." He left before she could answer. She watched him cross the hall toward his brother, toward the exit, toward whatever the rest of his day required of him. Roman appeared at her elbow. "That was unexpected," he said low. Which part?" "Hayes." She looked at the door Hayes had gone through. "He voted for the review." "He pushed for the review," Roman said. "There's a difference." A pause. "He's been reviewing the outer clinic filings since the second week. I noticed." She turned to look at Roman. "You notice everything." "I notice things worth noticing," he said. They stood in the thinning hall with the documentation between them and the outer settlement wolves filing past with something new in the way they moved. Not quite different, not yet, but the first faint structural suggestion of people who had been counted and found that the counting changed something. Sloane looked at Roman's profile, at the scar, at the worn coat, at the man who had grown up at the back of this hall and spent 8 years learning its architecture from the inside so that when the moment came, he could use it with precision. "They're going to come," she said. "Both of them, properly, not in corridors, after today." "Yes. What do we do?" Roman looked at her. The almost expression, fully present today, close enough to its real self that she could finally read it for what it was. "Whatever you decide," he said. "I meant what I said in the hall. You don't owe me anything, Sloane, not then and not now. And if I decided to..." "Whatever you decide," he said again, steady, certain. "I'm not going anywhere." The last of the wolves filed out of the frost hall. The braziers burned low in the gray afternoon light. Outside, the ice fields stretched north without limit, as white and silent and utterly indifferent to the small human geometries of love and rank and who had stood in a circle and who had spoken and what any of it would eventually cost. Chapter 5. The fracture between Grant and Hayes happened on a Sunday, and Sloane was not there for it, which was how she knew it was real. The things that happened because of her, she had learned, happened with an audience. The frost hall, the clinic corridor, the council session, the staged and witnessed productions of a pack hierarchy working out its complications in public. What happened between the twin kings in their private quarters on a Sunday morning with no witnesses had nothing to perform for, which meant it was the actual thing. She heard about it from the outer settlement woman whose daughter she was treating for the ear condition, a woman named Petra, somewhere in her late 30s, with the particular information network of someone who had spent decades being overlooked in rooms where things were said. Overlooked people heard more than anyone. "The kings argued," Petra said, watching Sloane work, casual as though she were commenting on weather. "Real argument, Not the formal disagreement kind. Sloane kept her hands steady. About? The outer settlement allocation vote, about the council session. A pause with something in it. About you. People argue about me now, Sloane said dryly. The Alpha Kings don't argue. Not like this. Petra's voice was careful with significance. My neighbor's son runs the North Wing corridor. He said it went on for nearly an hour. An hour. Grant and Hayes, who communicated in half-sentences and loaded silences and the long, wordless shorthand of people who had never in their lives needed to explain themselves to each other. An hour. She finished treating the child. Walked back through the cold under a white sky that pressed low and close, the kind of sky that meant serious snow was deciding whether to commit. The bond did its usual work on her the whole way, that dual pull, those two directions, and underneath them the steadier thing that didn't pull so much as weight. Roman was not at the table when she came in. She stopped. He was always at the table. The documents were there. The clay pot was there. 2 cups. But Roman was at the window, standing with his back to the room, looking out at the ice fields. She had never seen him at the window. It was so small a departure from his normal pattern that it hit her as significant before she had reasoned through why. She set her bag down. Grant came to see you, she said. Not a question. This morning, Roman said, still facing the window. About Hayes. A pause. About a number of things. She crossed to the fire and held her hands over it. The warmth was the particular relief of coming in from cold that you had been inside so long you had stopped noticing it. What did he say? Roman turned from the window. He looked for the first time in her experience of him like a man who was choosing very carefully between several versions of an answer. Grant is practical, he said finally. He always has been. His rejection in the hall was practical, calculated. The bond presented a complication, a low-rank mate at a politically difficult time, 2 kings who share a bond with the same female, the structural impossibility of that arrangement within pack hierarchy. He paused. He had decided before she entered the hall that he would refuse. He told me that today. She absorbed this. He told you. He wanted me to know what she had been dealing with, what you had been dealing with, he corrected. And something in the correction told her it had cost him something small and significant to say it. And Hayes? Hayes didn't decide. Roman's voice was careful. That's what the argument was. Grant decided for both of them. He told Hayes the night before the ceremony. Hayes agreed. A pause. He told me today that agreeing was the thing he has been unable to sit with since. The fire, the ice fields, the low white sky through the window. So Hayes wanted to accept the bond, she said slowly. Hayes wanted to make a different choice, Roman said. Whether he would have actually made it, I don't know. I don't think he knows. She was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Because you should have accurate information. His voice steady and direct. About all of them, including me. She looked at him. Including you, she said. I told you that day in the hall that I know what I am. I know what this looks like from outside. The lowest-ranked man in the room claiming a bond that 2 kings refused. He met her eyes. I want you to know that I also know what I feel, and I know the difference between the two. She crossed the room in 4 steps and sat down across from him at the table, with the fire between them and her hands flat on the documents, and looked at him directly and said, Then tell me, not what it looks like, what you feel. Roman was quiet for a moment, the specific quality of his quiet that was not absence but the opposite. Fullness, pressure, something gathered rather than empty. I have been paying attention to you, he said, since long before the frost hall. She waited. You work the night hours in the healer's ward because no one else will. You know the name of every outer settlement child who has come through the main ward in the last 3 years. I've read your patient notes. You always write the names. You filed 3 complaints about the Eastern Crossing Ice Road independently before I ever started my documentation, and they went nowhere because no one with standing signed them. He held her gaze. You have been trying to do the right thing in this pack, quietly and without reward for as long as I have been watching. And this pack has been returning the favor by making you invisible." She felt something move in her chest. Not the bond. Underneath the bond. The steadier thing, which was apparently not as quiet as she had thought. "Roman," she said. "I didn't claim you in that hall to rescue you," he said. "I want to be clear about that. You didn't need rescuing. You were standing in that circle with your chin up and your hands steady, and you were going to walk out of that hall intact regardless of what I said or didn't say." A pause. "I claimed you because the alternative was watching you leave that circle alone, and I have been watching you be alone in this pack for long enough." The fire crackled. Outside, the snow that had been deciding finally committed, and the ice fields disappeared behind a wall of white. "I'm still bonded to them," she said. "That doesn't... I can't just..." "I know," he said. Not pained, not resigned, just factual. The same register he used for everything, which she had come to understand was not coldness, but precision. He was precise about even the difficult things because imprecision had never served him, and he had learned to trust what was accurate over what was comfortable. "I'm not asking you to resolve anything. I'm not asking you for anything. I told you that on the first night, and I meant it." "You've never asked me for anything," she said. "No." "Why?" His mouth moved. The real expression, not the almost one, full and direct and very briefly uncontained. "Because you've spent your whole life in this pack giving things to people who never once asked if you were all right. I'm not adding to that list." She sat with this for a long moment. The snow against the window. The fire. The documents spread between them like a map of everything he had been building quietly in the years before she existed in his life as anything other than a woman in a ward who wrote down children's names. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He went very still. "I'm all right," she said. "If you were wondering." He turned his hand under hers, held it, said nothing because he was Roman and the thing had been said and additional words would have been imprecision. Outside, the snow came down across the frozen territories in the long, serious, committed way of something that intended to stay. Voss came for her on Tuesday. Not alone, he never moved without the procedural armor of company. 2 council elders with him, formal documentation in hand. The whole apparatus of official consequence arranged to make it clear this was not personal, which was how she knew it was entirely personal. "The outer clinic appointment," Voss said, standing in the doorway of the North Wing quarters. "Under review." "It was just approved," Sloane said, "by the full council. Emergency appointments are subject to a 60-day validity period under Article 14. The temporary nature of the position..." "She has 53 cases documented," Roman said from the table without looking up. "Continuity of care is protected under Patient Welfare Protocol, Article 22. The Patient Welfare Protocol applies to formal ward healers. Her appointment is formal council appointment with documentation on file." Roman set down his pen. "Would you like the reference number, Elder Voss? Or shall I save us both some time and note that this is the 6th procedural challenge you've raised against this appointment in 3 weeks, all of which have been resolved in favor of the appointment, and that at some point, a pattern of bad faith procedural obstruction becomes its own council matter?" The temperature in the doorway dropped. Voss looked at Sloane. His expression was the careful mask of a man who understood that what he was doing was visible and had decided to keep doing it anyway because the alternative, accepting that the hierarchy he had maintained for 60 years was rearranging itself around a healer's assistant from the Omega ward, was not something his architecture could accommodate. "The Alpha Kings will be reviewing all emergency appointments at the end of the 60-day period," he said finally. I want you to be aware of that." "I'm aware of most things," Sloane said, and looked at him with the steady equanimity of a woman who had been made invisible by this pack for long enough that the experience of being seen was no longer frightening. Voss left. Roman looked at her. 6, she said. "He'll try again." "Let him." She crossed to the table, sat down, reached for the documentation they had been working on, the expanded outer settlement resource filing, the follow-up to the ice road review, the next thing in the long, patient sequence of things Roman had been building. Where were we? Roman allowed himself the real expression again. Brief, warm, entirely his. Page 47, he said. She found page 47. Hayes came to the clinic that afternoon, alone, like Grant had come alone. But different. Grant had come with the manner of a man executing a decision he'd considered. Hayes came with the manner of a man who had not entirely decided and was here anyway. She was closing up. He waited outside, hands in his coat pockets, snow in his hair, the crown conspicuously absent. "You're not wearing it," she said, meaning the crown. "No. Why not?" He looked at her. "Because I didn't want to come here as a king." She considered this. "What did you want to come here as?" "Someone who owes you an explanation." She locked the door, faced him fully. "You agreed," she said. The thing Rome had told her, offered back to him directly, she had learned from Roman that clarity was kinder than avoidance. "The night before the ceremony, Grant told you and you agreed." Hayes's expression was not the glacial control of the Frost Hall. It was underneath the training and the rank and the lifetime of being one half of a singular unified power, something considerably more human than that. "Yes." "Why?" "Because Grant's reasons were logical." He paused. "And because I have spent my entire life defaulting to Grant's logic when my own felt uncertain. It's easier. When you are two people who are also one authority, the one who decides first tends to determine the outcome." "But you felt the bond." "The moment you walked in." His voice was quieter now. I've never felt anything like it. I didn't want to refuse it. I refused it anyway because Grant already had, and that was what we were doing, and I told myself his reasoning was sound enough for both of us." She looked at him in the snow and the gray light. The bond pulled, still, always, impartially. She breathed through it. "Hayes," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." "All right." If Grant had walked into the Frost Hall intending to accept the bond, would you have refused it alone? He was quiet for a long time. The snow found the gaps in their clothing with its usual indifferent precision. "No," he said finally. "Then what are you doing here?" "I'm trying to figure out," he said slowly, "whether it's too late to be someone who makes his own choices." She looked at him for a moment, then quietly, "That's not a question I can answer for you." "I know. But for what it's worth," she said, and she said it carefully because she meant it carefully. "The woman you turned away from in the Frost Hall has built a clinic and filed documentation and treated 53 wolves in 3 weeks, and is currently co-authoring a resource allocation review that is going to restructure how this pack treats its outer settlement permanently." She held his gaze. "She didn't wait for you to figure it out. Whatever you decide, you'd be choosing someone who has already decided who she is without you." Hayes looked at her with an expression she finally had a category for. It was the look of a man understanding, clearly and perhaps for the first time, exactly what he had thrown away. She walked past him into the snow and did not stop, and the bond pulled, and she walked through it, and she went home. Chapter 6. The second full council session was convened on a Thursday. Sloane knew it was coming because Roman told her at dawn, which was how she knew most things now. He had been building toward this session the way he built toward everything, methodically, thoroughly, with the patience of a man who understood that timing was not luck, but preparation meeting the right moment. "The Outer Settlement Resource Review is complete," he said without preamble, setting the documentation in front of her. "Full proposal, healthcare, infrastructure, education allocation, ice road maintenance schedule for the next 5 years. She looked at it. It was comprehensive in the way of something that had been assembled over years rather than weeks. Dense, precise, every claim supported, every projection documented. Every counter-argument anticipated and addressed 2 pages before a reader would think to raise it. "This isn't just about the ice roads anymore," she said. "No, This is about restructuring the PAC's resource distribution. Yes, she looked up at him. Voss is going to lose his mind. Voss has been losing his mind procedurally for 3 weeks. Today he gets to do it substantively. Roman's voice was dry, which was the closest he came to dark humor. The votes are there. I've checked 4 times. You've always had the votes, haven't you? Not quite a question. This was always what the clinic appointment and the Ice Road review were leading to. The clinic appointment was because the clinic needed a healer. He held her gaze. The rest, yes, the appointment created standing. The Ice Road review created precedent. The medical documentation created a record that the council cannot dismiss as theoretical. A pause. I have been building this file for 3 years. I needed a formal position to bring it. I didn't have one. And now you do. We do, he said. Simple, direct, unapologetic. She looked at him across the morning table with the low fire and the gray pre-light and the documents between them and felt very clearly the difference between what she felt for Roman and what she felt because of the bond. The bond was warm and golden and involuntary and tied to 2 men who had hurt her. What she felt for Roman was nothing like that. It was chosen. It was built. It was the accumulation of 50 mornings and 2 cups, and the understanding that this was a man who had looked at the thing this pack refused to see and spent 8 years making it impossible to ignore. She put her hand over his on the documents. He turned his hand over, held it. Let's go, she said. The Frost Hall full again. The same hall, the same wolves, many of the same faces from the ceremony 3 weeks ago, the elders, the warriors, the careful observers of pack hierarchy, but also, this time, the outer settlement wolves again. More of them than before. Word had moved through the eastern roads and the labor quarters and the low-rank housing with the speed of people who understand when something is being decided about them. They stood differently than they had at the last session. Not at the back. They had filed in early and they were spread through the hall, not aggressively, not as a statement, just as people who had been told they were allowed to be here and had taken the information seriously. Sloane sat in the front with Roman and felt the hall's attention organize itself around her in a way that had changed from the last time. Last time, it had been the specific interest of witnesses to a spectacle. Now it was something else. The recalibrating attention of a pack, looking at a woman who had been made invisible and was no longer, and trying to reconcile those 2 things with what they had watched happen on the claiming ground. Grant and Hayes entered together. They sat at the council dais, formally, correctly, the twin structure of their authority intact in public. But Sloane, who had spent 3 weeks learning to read small things, saw the gap, not physical. They were seated as they always sat, close, united. But there was something in the air between them that had not been there before. Something that had not been resolved by the Sunday argument or anything since. She did not look at them longer than necessary. Roman opened the session with the documentation, and she watched the room receive it, page by page, the full 3-year accounting, the outer settlement laid bare in numbers and maps and medical records and infrastructure reports and educational statistics, that told, collectively, a story of systematic deprivation so thorough and so long that the only remarkable thing about it was how unremarkable it had been allowed to feel. Voss objected 4 times. Roman answered all 4 with page references. The 4th time, Grant spoke before Roman could. The objection is noted and overruled, Grant said. His voice was the same flat authority as always, but he was looking at the documentation, not at Voss. Continue. Voss went still. Sloane felt the hall's attention shift. Hayes spoke next, not in response to an objection, but directly, unprompted, which was its own signal to everyone watching. The medical documentation on the ear condition cases. How many children in the outer settlement are currently in the same position? Documented need, formal ward access denied. 11, Sloane said. I want them seen at the outer clinic by end of month. He looked at her steadily. Formally scheduled. Not waiting list. Scheduled. That will require additional supply allocation. I'll sign the requisition today." He did not look at Voss. He did not look at Grant. He looked at Sloane with the expression of a man making a choice he intended to keep. All 11. Something moved through the hall. Not loud, not the murmur of entertainment or spectacle, something quieter and more significant. The sound of a room recognizing that the center of gravity had shifted. Grant had gone very still beside his brother. The vote passed. The Outer Settlement Resource Allocation, 5 years, full spectrum, infrastructure and healthcare and education, passed with 8 votes. Voss voted no and looked, for the first time in Sloane's experience of him, genuinely small. The 2 elders who had accompanied his procedural challenges abstained, which was its own kind of verdict. The hall moved into its post-session reorganization. Roman was surrounded immediately by council members with questions and follow-up requests and the practical logistics of a large structural change landing on the machinery of PAC administration all at once. He was answering 3 things simultaneously with the calm efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this exact moment for 3 years and had answers ready. She stood slightly apart and let it happen. Let it be his moment, because it was entirely, completely, 3 years in the building his. Sloane. Grant. He was standing beside her with the same notelessness as every other time he had sought her out in the past 3 weeks. No guards, no ceremony, just a man trying to be present without the architecture of his office surrounding him. "Congratulations," he said. "The vote." "Thank Roman," she said. This was his." "I know whose it was." A pause. "I also know how much of the documentation came from the clinic. From you." She said nothing. "I need to say something." His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before, something that had been stripped of the practiced flatness. Not as an alpha king. I'd prefer to say it as someone who handled something very badly. She looked at him. The bond pulled, faithful and unasked for. "I decided before I saw your face," he said. "I want you to understand that. It was political. It was practical. It was the logic of 2 kings sharing a fated bond with an Omega-ranked female and what that would do to the PAC's perception of us. I reasoned through it, and I made a decision, and I made it for Hayes without asking him whether he agreed or whether he wanted to agree." He paused. I have never done that before. Made a decision that consequential for both of us. I told myself it was what he would have decided anyway." "Was it?" "No." The hall moved around them. Somewhere near the front, Roman was explaining resource allocation timelines to Elder Crane with the patient precision of a teacher who had expected to need to teach. "I'm not asking you to forgive it," Grant said. "I don't think that's something you owe me." "I don't," she agreed. "I know." He looked at her, and for the first time since the Frost Hall, she saw past the gray control of his eyes to something underneath it. Something that had been sitting there, she suspected, since the morning he had stood in the snow outside the locked clinic without knowing what to do with itself. "I'm telling you so you know it's not. So you know that what I did in this hall was not about you, who you are. I didn't know who you were." "You know now," she said. "Yes. And?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that wasn't Roman's quiet. Not the gathered, pressurized quiet of someone who had too much to say and had learned to contain it. This was the quiet of a man who had spent his whole life knowing what he thought and was encountering, possibly for the first time, a situation in which what he thought was insufficient. "And I think I made an irreversible mistake," he said. "And I think I have to live with that. And I think the only honest thing I can offer you is the truth of it, which is that the bond is not theoretical for me. It has not been theoretical since the morning you walked past me in the snow and went back to work." She felt the bond respond to this with its usual impartial faithfulness, burning, certain, hers and not hers. "I'm with Roman," she said. "Simple. True. I know. And I won't apologize for that. I would not ask you to." He held her gaze, steady, no longer cold, just honest in the way that honesty costs something when it arrives too late. "He's a better man than me." She looked at him for a moment. He's a different kind of man than you, she said carefully. That's not the same thing. Grant absorbed this, nodded once, the small, precise nod of someone filing an accurate thing for later. He walked back to the dais, back to Hayes, who had been watching from a distance and met his brother's eyes when Grant arrived and held them in that long, wordless register. And what passed between them this time, Sloane thought, looked different than it had for weeks. Not resolved, but real. The beginning of two people renegotiating something fundamental about how they operated, which was harder than any council vote and would take considerably longer. Roman appeared at her side. The hall was thinning. The outer settlement wolves were leaving with the particular purposeful energy of people who had somewhere specific to be. Back to work, back to the eastern roads, back to the clinic tomorrow. One of them, a broad-shouldered man in a worn coat, stopped as he passed Roman and extended his hand. Roman shook it. No words, none needed. 47 people came to the first session, Roman said, watching them go. 47 people I filed paperwork for in a review nobody read. 91 came today, Sloane said. I counted. That almost expression, fully present now, the real one. It'll be more next time. She stood beside him in the thinning hall and looked out at the ice fields through the tall windows, the endless white-gray north, the frozen territories that had contained both of their lives and most of their invisibility, the landscape that pressed down cold and heavy and did not care at all about rank or bond or who had stood in what circle on what day. She took his hand. He held it in the specific way he held everything, entirely, precisely, with no portion of his attention elsewhere. The 60-day review, she said. Voss will come. Let him. The bond, she said, more quietly. Grant and Hayes, it won't just stop. I know. It's complicated. Most real things are. She looked at him. Does it bother you? That I still feel it? Roman was quiet for a moment. Then, you felt it before you met me and you chose this table. You've been choosing this table every morning. He held her gaze. I'm not threatened by something that couldn't make you stay when you had every reason to. She thought about the frost hall, about standing in the white circle with 500 wolves watching and the bond burning and her chin raised exactly 1 degree and Hayes looking at her, and the silence that had stretched like ice over black water until one quiet, unhurried voice had broken it from the last position in the last row. You knew, she said. Even then, you already knew how it would go. I knew how I wanted it to go, he said. There's a difference. Did you know about the bond before the hall? I knew you had been matched to them. Pack rumor. A pause. I hoped they would be stupid enough to refuse it. She laughed. It came out genuine and slightly startled, and he looked at her with the real expression, fully uncontained, warm in the way of something that didn't need to announce its warmth. You hoped they'd refuse it, she said. I had a lot of documentation ready if they did. She shook her head, still laughing, and leaned into him and felt the frost hall around them and the ice fields through the glass and the bond burning with its faithful senselessness and beneath it. Steady and chosen and built from 50 mornings and 2 cups, and a man who had been paying attention since before she knew he existed. The other thing. The real thing. The one that didn't need the moon goddess to validate it because it had built itself out of work and honesty and the specific courage of a man who had stood in the last position in the last row and spoken 4 words into a silence that no one else would break. Outside, the frozen territories held their cold and their white and their long dark endlessly. Inside the frost hall, in the dying light of the afternoon, 2 people stood with their hands linked in the place where everything had started and let the rest of it be complicated and unresolved and ongoing, the way real things always are. And it was, Sloane thought, exactly enough. Thank you so much for listening. If this story hit differently for you, or even if you just liked the vibe, drop a comment. I genuinely love hearing from you. I'm already working on what comes next, so stay close. Until then, take care of yourself. Love, Sire.